Chapter 1. The bell over the cafe door rang at 7 in the morning. A man in a gray coat walked inside and sat at the back table. The table that nobody touched. The table where the old men took their morning meetings. He did not look at the staff. He did not look at the two guards by the window. He opened the menu. He closed it. He waited. The waitress walked over slowly. She knew the rules. She asked what he wanted. He said 1 espresso. He paid in cash. He drank it in 3 sips. He placed a folded napkin on the saucer and stood up. He walked out without a word. The napkin had a sheet folded inside. A signature was on it. A signature that should not exist. Why did he sit there on that morning? Stay with me, because what happens next did not stay buried. Chapter 2. His name was Luca Vito. He was 32 years old. He lived alone in a rented room above a laundromat in Queens. He worked nights at a print shop, the kind that still used real ink and real paper. He had no wife. He had no children. He had no friends who knew his real last name. He had been disowned at 17 after the funeral, and he had not spoken to a Vito in 15 years. He had built his life out of small, invisible pieces. A library card under a different name. A bank account in a credit union nobody had heard of. A landlord who took cash. A boss who did not ask questions. The kind of life that leaves no shape behind it. The cafe was Cafe Maranzano. It sat on Mulberry Street in Little Italy. It had been there since 1962. The wood on the bar was the same wood. The mirror behind the register was the same mirror. The Maranzano family had owned it the entire time, and everyone in the neighborhood knew what that meant. The cafe was the office. The boss took his coffee at the back table every morning. He read the papers. He listened to people who came to ask for things. The line started forming on the sidewalk at 6:30. Old men. Younger men. Men in suits. Men in work clothes. They all came with the same posture. Quiet hands. Quiet eyes. Hats off at the door. That morning the line was not there. The boss had a doctor visit in Midtown. The back table was empty. Luca had been watching the door for 11 days. He knew the schedule. He knew the routes. He knew which guard smoked and which guard did not. He knew the waitress was the boss's niece. He knew the man at the register was the boss's cousin. He knew everything about Cafe Maranzano because he had spent the last 6 years learning it. He walked in at 7. He sat at the back table. The two guards by the window looked up. They did not move. They did not recognize him. He was just a man in a gray coat. He looked clean. He looked tired. He looked like a salesman waiting for a ride. They went back to their phones. The radio played a soft song. Steam hissed from the espresso machine. The waitress came over. Her name was Sophia. She was 24. She had worked at the cafe since she was 16. She looked at the back table and she knew. She knew the rules. The back table was not for customers. The back table was for the boss. She did not say this. She just stood there with her order pad and waited for him to look up. Luca looked up. He smiled a small smile. He said good morning. He said his name was Mr. Greco. He said he was meeting someone at 7:30. He said could he have 1 espresso while he waited. She said yes. She wrote it down. She walked to the bar. She told the cousin behind the register. The cousin looked at the back table. He shrugged. He made the espresso himself. He put 2 sugar packets on the saucer out of habit, the way he did for any older customer he did not recognize. Luca drank the espresso. He did not touch the sugar. He looked at the photographs on the wall. There were 47 of them. He had counted them years ago when he was a boy. His father had brought him here once, on a Sunday in the fall, a week before everything ended. His father had been wearing a brown jacket and a green tie. His father had ordered a cappuccino and a small slice of lemon cake. His father had pointed at one of the photos and had said, "That is the man who will kill me." Luca had been 8 years old. He had not understood the words. He had laughed because his father had said it with a small smile, the way a man tells a joke he is not sure how to tell. He understood the words now. He understood every word his father had ever spoken in this room. He understood the brown jacket, the green tie, the small slice of lemon cake, and the small smile. His father had been saying goodbye. His father had known. Luca did not turn his head toward the photograph now. He did not need to. He knew which one it was. Third row from the top. Second from the left. A man with a wide square jaw and a hat in his hand. Giuseppe Maranzano. The peaceful baker. The man Marco named his son after. Chapter 3. The cafe was quiet for a Wednesday. 2 old men played cards in the corner. A young couple shared a pastry by the window. The radio behind the bar played a soft Italian song that Luca's mother used to hum in the kitchen. He listened. He breathed. He felt the cup in his hand. The handle was warm. The saucer had a small chip on the edge. He noticed these things because he had trained himself to notice these things. He had been preparing for this morning for a very long time. His father had been Antonio Vito. Antonio had run a small import business out of a warehouse in Red Hook. Antonio had not been a violent man. He had paid what he was supposed to pay. He had stayed quiet. He had kept his head down. But in 1998, there had been a dispute over a shipment from Naples. The Maranzano family had wanted a larger cut. Antonio had said no. Antonio had said it politely. Antonio had said it once. 2 weeks later, Antonio Vito had been shot 4 times in the parking lot of a diner on Flatbush Avenue. The police had called it a robbery. The neighborhood had known better. Luca had been 8. His mother had taken him to live with her sister in Albany. She had told him to forget the name Vito. She had told him to become someone else. She had died of a heart condition when he was 16. He had finished high school. He had taken a job at a print shop. He had kept his head down for 15 years. But Luca had a grandfather. His grandfather was Enzo Vito. Enzo had been 91 years old when Antonio was killed. Enzo had lived in a small rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, above a tailor shop on Court Street. Enzo had not gone to the funeral. Enzo had not called. Luca had assumed Enzo did not care. Luca had been wrong about that for 13 years. When Luca turned 21, a lawyer had contacted him. The lawyer's name was Mr. Filani. The lawyer said Enzo Vito had died 3 months earlier. The lawyer said there was a small inheritance. A box. The box was waiting at an office on Court Street. Luca had taken the train down on a Saturday morning. The lawyer had handed him a wooden box. The lawyer had said Enzo had left specific instructions. The box was to be given to Luca on his 21st birthday, not before, not after. The lawyer did not know what was inside it. Luca had taken the box home. He had opened it that night on the floor of his studio apartment. Inside there was a stack of papers. Photographs. Names. Bank records. Phone numbers. There were photos of Maranzano family members from the 1980s, the 1990s, and even from 2010, taken after Enzo had died, which made no sense at first until Luca understood that someone else had been adding to the box for years on Enzo's behalf. Photographs taken from across streets, from parked cars, from rooftops. Enzo had been watching the Maranzano family for 30 years. Quietly, carefully, from a small apartment above a tailor shop. And in the bottom of the box, sealed in a manila envelope, there had been a single sheet of paper. A contract, dated June 11, 1998. A contract that named Antonio Vito. A contract that listed a price, $12,000. And at the bottom of the contract, there were 2 signatures. The first signature was Salvatore Maranzano, the boss who had given the order. Salvatore had died of cancer in 2003. The second signature was the one that mattered. The second signature was Giuseppe Maranzano, Salvatore's older brother. Giuseppe was the grandfather of the current boss, a man named Marco Maranzano. Giuseppe had been the family's quiet uncle. Giuseppe had retired to Florida in 2001. Giuseppe had died of natural causes in 2009. The current boss, Marco, had loved his grandfather. Marco had cried at the funeral. Marco had named his oldest son Giuseppe. Marco had told everyone that his grandfather had been a peaceful man, a baker, a man who had stayed out of the family business. Luca had spent 11 years learning what to do with the contract. He had learned patience. He had learned the roots of every Maranzano cousin. He had learned which old men still owed favors. He had learned which captains hated Marco and which captains loved him. He had learned the seating chart at every christening. He had learned that Marco had two rivals inside the family. Two cousins who had been waiting for a reason. A reason like a piece of paper with the wrong signature on it. He had not done this alone. There had been a man named Mr. Fellini, the same lawyer who had handed him the box. Mr. Fellini had passed away in 2019. Before he died, he had introduced Luca to a retired bookkeeper named Mrs. Carlino, an old woman who had worked for the Vidal family in the 1970s. Mrs. Carlino had taught Luca how the books worked, how money moved between cafes and bakeries and funeral homes, how payment of $12,000 could be hidden inside a flower order, how the council rules worked and which rules still mattered. Mrs. Carlino had died in 2022, peacefully in her sleep, in a small house in Bay Ridge. She had left Luca her notebooks. The notebooks sat in the storage unit next to Enzo's boxes. The radio finished the Italian song. The cafe was still quiet. Sophia was wiping down the counter. The two old men in the corner were laughing about something one of them had said. The young couple by the window had paid and left. Outside, the morning sun was hitting the church across the street. The street smelled like fresh bread from the bakery next door. It was, for one more minute, an ordinary Wednesday in an ordinary neighborhood. Luca finished his espresso. He set the cup down softly. He took a folded napkin from his coat pocket. He placed the napkin on the saucer. He stood up. He nodded at Sophia. He walked out into the morning light. He turned right at the corner. He did not look back. Chapter 4. Sophia walked over to clear the table. She picked up the cup. She saw the folded napkin. She thought it was a tip. She unfolded it. She did not understand at first. There was a photocopy inside the napkin. A photocopy of an old document. She saw the date 1998. She saw the name Antonio Vital. She saw the two signatures. The second signature made her stomach drop. Giuseppe Maranzano. Her great-uncle. The peaceful baker. She had seen that signature on family Christmas cards her whole life. She had seen it on the back of a photograph of her own baptism. She did not call the police. She walked to the back office. She knocked on the door. The cousin from the register was already in there, talking on the phone with Marco. Marco was at the doctor's office in Midtown. He was due back at 10. Sophia put the napkin on the desk in front of the cousin. The cousin looked down. The cousin stopped talking. The cousin told Marco he had to come back now. Marco said why. The cousin could not say it out loud over the phone. The cousin just said come back now. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to break. By 8:30, the napkin had moved from the cafe to a private apartment 3 blocks away. By 9, the apartment had 3 men in it. By 9:15, there were 6. By 9:30, Marco Maranzano walked through the door, still wearing the paper bracelet from the doctor's office. He read the contract. He read it twice. He sat down on a folding chair. He did not speak for 90 seconds. The room watched him. The room did not breathe. Marco was 47 years old. He had been the boss for 4 years. He had taken over after his father, Vincent, had a stroke at the New Year's party in 2022. He had taken over carefully. He had not made enemies. He had kept the old captains happy. He had named his son after his grandfather Giuseppe because he believed his grandfather had been the kindest man he had ever known. He had a black and white photograph of Giuseppe on his desk in his home office. He looked at it every morning before he made coffee. The contract changed everything. The contract said his grandfather had cautioned the hit on Antonio Vital. Cautioned meant Giuseppe had approved it. Cautioned meant Giuseppe had not been a peaceful baker. Cautioned meant Giuseppe had been part of the inside leadership the entire time. Cautioned meant Marco's entire understanding of his own family was wrong from the ground up. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was this. There were 2 captains inside the Maranzano family who came from Giuseppe's other side. 2 cousins. Their names were Renzo and Polly. Renzo and Polly had been quietly resentful for years. They had felt skipped over. They had felt that Marco had inherited his position through his father Vincent, not through merit. They had whispered about it at weddings. They had complained at christenings. They had never moved because they had no excuse. The contract was an excuse. The contract said Giuseppe, the grandfather everyone loved, had a hidden history. The contract said the Maranzano family had a debt that had never been paid. The contract said Marco had been sitting on stolen ground for 4 years and had not known it. Renzo and Polly would not stay quiet once they heard. And someone in that apartment at 9:30 was already on the phone with Renzo in a back bedroom with the door closed. Marco knew this. Marco looked around the room and counted the faces. He counted 6 men. He trusted 4 of them. The other 2 had cousins on Renzo's side. The other 2 were already gone in their minds. Marco understood the shape of the next 48 hours. He understood that a man named Luca Vital had walked into his cafe and had not used a gun. A man named Luca Vital had used a piece of paper. And a piece of paper in the right room could do more damage than a gun. A gun ends one man. A piece of paper ends a family. Marco asked one question. He asked it quietly. He asked, who is Luca Vital? The room did not know. Nobody had thought about Antonio Vital in 28 years. Nobody had thought about Antonio Vital's son. Antonio Vital had been a footnote. A small import case from 1998. The son had been a child. The son had moved away. The son had disappeared. The son had not disappeared. The son had been learning. The son was now 32, and he was walking down Mulberry Street with his hands in his coat pockets and a small smile on his face, and 3 more envelopes in a leather satchel slung across his shoulder. Marco told the room to find him. He told 2 of his men to drive to Queens. He told another to call every print shop in the borough. He told the cousin from the cafe to question Sophia again. Sophia had only said the man called himself Mr. Greco. She had said he had been polite. She had said he had not raised his voice. She had said his hands had been very steady, the way a doctor's hands are steady. The room took that in. The room understood that whoever this man was, he had practiced. He had not walked in by accident. He had walked in on the one morning the boss was at the doctor. He had known the schedule. Someone close to the family had been feeding him the schedule for years. Marco looked at his 6 men and wondered which one. He did not say this out loud. He nodded once. He sent them to work. He stayed in the apartment alone for a long time, holding the napkin in his hand, watching the coffee ring on the upper right corner dry. Chapter 5. By 11 o'clock the storm had started. Renzo got the call at his bakery in Bensonhurst. He listened. He hung up. He sat down on a stool by the proofing rack. He did not speak for a long time. Then he made 3 phone calls of his own. Polly got the news from his nephew at the funeral home in Queens. Polly did not sit down. Polly drove straight to Renzo's bakery. They met in the back room. They closed the door. They talked for 2 hours over cold coffee and a plate of biscotti nobody touched. The argument they made was simple. Giuseppe Maranzano had signed off on the Antonio Vital hit. Giuseppe had done this without the consent of the wider family council. Giuseppe had taken $12,000 from the family treasury without recording it in the books. This was a violation of the old rules. The old rules said any hit had to be approved by the council. The old rules said any payment had to be recorded. Giuseppe had broken both rules. And his grandson Marco, by sitting on the boss's chair for 4 years, had inherited the violation. Marco was, by the old rules, illegitimate. That was the argument. It was not a perfect argument. The old rules were 60 years old. The council had not met in 20 years. Most of the men who had enforced the old rules were dead. But the argument did not need to be perfect. The argument only needed to give Renzo and Polly a reason to move. And they had been waiting for a reason for a very long time. By 2 in the afternoon, Renzo had reached out to a captain in Staten Island named Tony Bacca. Tony had served under Giuseppe in the 70s. Tony had been close to the family treasury. Tony had retired in 2015. Tony was 81 years old and lived alone in a small house near the ferry. Tony took the call. Tony said he remembered the 1998 contract. Tony said he had been in the room when Giuseppe had cautioned it. Tony said he had advised against it. Tony said Giuseppe had not listened. Tony said he would testify to the council if a council were called. The council had not met since 2005. But the rules said any 3 captains could call one. By 3 in the afternoon, 3 captains had called one. The council would meet on Friday. Friday was 2 days away. Marco had 2 days to either prevent the council or prepare for it. He could not prevent it. The captains had already sent the message. The message had gone out to the older men in Philadelphia and Boston and Providence. The message had gone out to the cousins in New Jersey. The message had gone out to the uncle in Florida, who nobody had spoken to in 15 years. Marco called a meeting at his home on Wednesday night. He gathered his closest 7 men in the basement. He told them the situation. He told them they had to find Luca Vital. He told them they had to learn who else had a copy of the contract. He told them they had to learn how the original contract had survived. The original contract had been a single piece of paper. It had been kept in a locked drawer in Salvatore Maranzano's office in 1998. The office had been raided after Salvatore died. The contents of the drawer had been burned. Or so everyone had believed for 22 years. The contract that Luca had left on the napkin had a small mark on the corner. A coffee ring. A faint brown circle on the upper right edge. Marco recognized the ring. He had grown up seeing that exact ring on documents in his father's office. His father, Vincent, had drunk espresso while reviewing papers. His father had set the cup down on the upper right corner. His father had always left a ring. That meant the contract had been in Vincent's possession at some point. That meant Vincent had not burned it. That meant Vincent had kept it. Or someone had stolen it from him while he was sleeping. Marco's father, Vincent, was in a nursing home in Westchester. Vincent had been in a wheelchair since the stroke. Vincent could no longer speak in full sentences. Marco drove to the nursing home that night. He sat by his father's bed. He held up the contract. He asked his father one question. "Did you keep this?" Vincent looked at the paper. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. Vincent nodded once. Marco asked one more question. "Where did you keep it?" Vincent looked down at his hands. Vincent could not answer. Or would not. Marco sat there for an hour, holding his father's hand, and got no further answer. On his way back to the city, Marco thought about a name he had not thought about in 20 years. Enzo Vital. The old man from Court Street. The grandfather. He remembered, suddenly, a story his father had once told him at a Christmas dinner when Marco was still in his 30s. His father had said Enzo had come to see Vincent in 1999, a year after Antonio's death. Enzo had asked Vincent for one thing. Enzo had asked Vincent to keep the original contract safe. Vincent had asked why. Enzo had said because one day a Vito would come back for it. Vincent had laughed. Vincent had laughed and had agreed, because Vincent had thought it was the request of a grieving old man who had lost his mind. Vincent had kept the contract in a locked drawer in his home office for 20 years and had told no one. Vincent had taken the key with him to the nursing home. The key was on a chain around his neck. Marco realized this now. His father had been keeping a promise to a man whose son he had helped kill, and his father had kept that promise for half his life, and Marco had never asked why. Chapter 6. By Thursday morning, the city was moving in 3 directions. Renzo's side was preparing for the council. They were gathering witnesses, old men, retired captains, anyone who could speak to Giuseppe's hidden history. Marco's side was preparing a defense, looking for any document that could explain Giuseppe's signature as a forgery, a setup, a fake. And in the middle, Luca Vito was walking through Brooklyn, carrying a leather satchel, going to a small storage unit he had rented in 2014 under the name Greco. The storage unit held the rest of his grandfather, Enzo's records. 11 boxes. 30 years of quiet observation. Luca had not opened the boxes in 3 years. He had everything memorized. He took out one specific box. He took out one specific folder. He took out one specific photograph. The photograph was dated October 1998. It showed Giuseppe Maranzano sitting in a diner with a man named Carlo Russo. Carlo Russo had been a freelance shooter from Bayonne. Carlo Russo had been the man who shot Antonio Vidal in the parking lot. The photograph showed Giuseppe handing Carlo Russo an envelope. The envelope was visible. The shape of cash was visible inside it. The date on the photograph was 4 months after Antonio's death. The photograph proved Giuseppe had personally paid the shooter. Not through a middleman. Personally. With his own hands. Across a table in a public diner. Luca's grandfather, Enzo, had taken the photograph from a parked car across the street. Enzo had been 91 years old. Enzo had sat in that car for 6 hours waiting for the meeting that he had known was coming, because Enzo had known everyone Giuseppe knew, and Enzo had known how to wait. Luca made 8 copies of the photograph at a print shop in Sunset Park. He put 1 copy in a plain white envelope. He addressed the envelope to Tony Baca on Staten Island. He dropped it in a mailbox. He addressed another copy to a retired captain in Providence. He dropped that one in a different mailbox. He addressed 6 more. He spread them across 6 neighborhoods. By Friday morning, all 8 envelopes would arrive at their destinations. All 8 men would have proof. Not a contract. A photograph. With a date stamp. With a face. With a hand passing money. The council met on Friday afternoon in the back of a social club in Bensonhurst. 11 captains attended. 8 had received envelopes. Tony Baca stood up first. Tony told the room what he had seen in 1998. Tony showed the photograph. The photograph passed from hand to hand. 11 men in 11 different chairs looked at the same image. 11 men in 11 different chairs reached the same conclusion. Giuseppe had violated the council rules. Giuseppe had paid a shooter personally. Giuseppe's branch of the family had no claim to the boss's seat. Marco was given a chance to speak. Marco was 47 years old. Marco was the only Maranzano who had ever named his son after a man who had murdered a peaceful importer for $12,000. Marco stood up. Marco did not defend his grandfather. Marco said he had not known. Marco said he was sorry. Marco said he would step down. The room was silent. The room had not expected this. Some of them had come ready for a fight. There was no fight to have. Renzo was offered the seat. Renzo accepted it. Paulie was made his second. The Maranzano family did not have a war that week. The Maranzano family had a transfer of power. Quiet, internal, final. By Saturday morning, the cafe on Mulberry Street had a new owner of record on paper behind the corporate structure. The old men in the neighborhood noticed the change in the morning line. The line was shorter. The faces were different. The wood on the bar was still the same wood. The mirror behind the register was still the same mirror. Luca Vito watched it from a coffee shop 2 blocks away. He drank a cappuccino. He read the newspaper. He folded the paper and set it on the table. He paid in cash. He walked to the subway. He took the train back to Queens. He went to his room above the laundromat. He sat on his bed. He took out the small wooden box his grandfather had left him. He placed the empty manila envelope inside. He closed the box. He set the box on a shelf above the radiator. He thought for a moment about his father in the parking lot in 1998. He thought about his mother in the kitchen in Albany, humming the Italian song over a pot of boiling water. He thought about his grandfather in the parked car on a side street in Bayonne, 91 years old, holding a camera with steady hands and waiting for 6 hours without complaining. He thought about the lawyer Mr. Fellini, who had handed him the box at 21 and had asked no questions. He thought about Vincent Maranzano in the nursing home, holding the key on a chain, keeping a promise to a dead man for 20 years. He thought about Sophia clearing the cup. He thought about the bell over the cafe door. He did not feel triumph. He felt the same quiet he had felt his entire adult life. The signature had spoken. A house had fallen from the inside. And the disowned heir, who had never raised his voice in his life, put on his coat and walked to the print shop for the night shift, because there was a job waiting on the press, and because that was what his father would have done.